ahead and get started. So I want to say thank you and good afternoon to everyone that is coming. I see we still have some folks that are coming into the webinar, so welcome everyone. And thank you for joining us for our Strengthening Rural Colleges webinar on applying for U.S. Department of Labor Employment and Training Administration grants. My name is Sean Robbins, and I am the Policy Associate at ACCT, leading our Strengthening Rural Community Colleges initiative. We have a wonderful panel that's going to be led by Cheryl Martin and her team at the Department of Labor. But before we get started, just wanted to share some more information about who's currently in attendance with us. So this is our ACCT region representation that we have by a breakdown. You can see we have Pacific, Western, Central, Southern, and Northeast regions. And as you can see, pretty much a very similar breakdown from the institutions that are represented across those regions. So we just wanted to share that and just welcome everybody and say thank you for coming. And we look forward to what's in store here with our webinar. In addition, we also can see from these charts, these are some of the questions that we had asked you when you registered about if you have applied for a USDOL grant or have been part of implementing one. And interestingly enough, about 2/3 of those have not applied or have been a part of implementing one. And then just before we actually turn things over to Cheryl and her team, we also want to welcome everyone here that is on the call and the webinar to join us for our peer learning network. And with this, it's really going to be focusing in addition to this webinar, we're bringing in some rural community college leaders to actually discuss their experiences as grant recipients of USDOL grants. On Tuesday, May 3rd, we'll be sending out the link to register. So we hope to see y'all there. And with that being said, I want to turn things over to Cheryl. And it's wonderful to have you and your team. Thank you again for joining us. And we're really looking forward to this discussion.
Great. Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes.
Okay, and like I see about 4 of my names, but I'll just ignore all of that and not worry about it. One of the things I want to be sure about is that Aaron Cadwallader, Don Murphy, and Zodi McConan are all on. I know Zodi is on. Aaron's going to be the one sharing our slides. So we all just jumped off of a staff meeting with all of us, with all 100 of us in our office right now. So we're here we are. We quickly ran over to your room to be in your webinar room as well, right? That's how it works when you're on Zoom. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking, and I'm going to let Zodi and Don troubleshoot the thing about, is Aaron sharing the slides or can somebody else share the slides? Because I can talk through the first few of these without needing to have any slides. And the first thing I wanted to say is that we are just delighted to be speaking with you. I've been connecting with Penny Wills for several years now as part of RCCA, and it's been great to meet Sean and Steve. And so we're really happy to be with you. And, you know, from the results of the registration survey, I note that only about a third of you have ever applied for a DOL grant or been involved in implementing one. So, you know, we'd love to see that number go up. And so we will have some questions for you throughout our presentation day to help us understand more about why rural colleges are and are not involved with our grants, and if there's anything that can be done about that. And thank you. One of you looks like you put up the slide, so we're good to go on that. Our next slide, please. Our presenters today will be, as I said, Aaron Cadwallader, Zodi McConan, Don Jackman Murphy, and myself. And we are all in something called the Division of Strategic Investments. I love that name. You know, everything that we do with you is a strategic investment, right? Next slide, please. And we're going to be moving fast through these slides so that, because we really want to have time to have people ask us, well, we want to ask you questions and you ask us questions at the end. So these are the things we'll cover: how an FOA is born, some grant tips, some grants that we've got, learning from past grants and consortia, some tools and resources, and then questions, yours and ours. Next, please. So these are some of the questions that we'd like to understand from you. And I'm just sort of giving you a heads up on these now. And you are welcome to put your answers in the chat at any time. And we will also come back to them at the end. But, you know, things like what has prevented you or encouraged you to apply for grants, and what worked and what didn't when you were implementing grants, and have you been involved in consortium grants, and has that helped or not helped some of your you know, the work that you've done. And I see a polling question come up here right now too. So do you, and those are great, I love that. And I don't know if there's a way to do that twice or something, but we'll figure that out. Do you have any suggestions for us? And is there anything else that you'd like us to know? So do you want me to pause here a minute, Sean, and let people answer those polling questions, or what would you suggest?
We can give folks just a moment. They're the same questions that we have up here, so we're just trying to capture a little bit here. So I'll just give folks just a moment. Feel free to answer throughout. I'll give y'all just a bit, just a second, and then we can continue on. So Cheryl,
Great.
feel free
Thanks.
to when you want.
Okay, and I would just say too that if you have thoughts that are sort of like, you know, didn't fit in the boxes that you can check there, we would love to hear those if you would add those to the chat. And I know that Sean and Steve will pass those on to us. As well as I think after this, there's an opportunity for you to respond to a survey to them, and you can respond there as well. So I'll leave it to you, Sean, as to when you'd like to close that and go on to the next slide, which is how a funding opportunity announcement, or FOA, is born. All right, next slide, please. So this is a little picture that I came up with once upon a time when I was talking to some grant writers, and okay, there we go. And because, you know, there's a lot of things that go into writing or into producing an FOA, that thing that you get in your hand at the end. And I heard this said once upon a time that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. And I think that an FOA is a little bit like that. Like, it just comes out with a few bumps and some weird, like, well, how did that get there, right? And I know there's reasons for that for camels, right? There's reasons for everything in an FOA too. And this explains some of that. So first is always Congress. You know, people often thank DOL for their grants, but federal money will only come to you if Congress authorizes and appropriates it. So you know, the thanks for federal grant funding always goes to Congress, right? They also might put some constraints on that, and they might not. They might just say the secretary shall decide how to do this. Or they might say, we want you to have this purpose, and you have to do this emphasis, and you have to do it this way, and you have to do it by this time. And only people with, you know, who are left-handed on Tuesdays can apply. And, you know, that's a silly joke, right? But they will put constraints on there. And of course, we follow every single one of those. To the extent that then we have policy choices, like, oh, maybe we could have left-handed people or right-handed people apply. Then people like at the White House, and there's a whole alphabet soup of people at the White House that all like to weigh in from different perspectives. It's interesting. Or the secretary or the assistant secretary, those are all political positions. They all have views, and we present to them, here are your policy choices that you can make. What do you want us to do? And they tell you, I want you to do this, or I want you to do that, or have you thought about this, or here's, you know, here's something new. And then usually it ends up being like, wow, everybody wants everything. Life, right? So anyway, we are there from the program office right there in the red at about 7 o'clock. And we're the ones that actually write the FOAs, but we have to write it to meet all of those requirements and policy preferences. Once we have drafts, they have to be approved by the lawyers, the solicitor's office, and by the Office of Grants Management, and so forth. So we do a lot of checking and coordinating and changing. But along the way, we try to make it as workable for people like you as possible, based on our own experience, or based on what we experienced in the last grant when we were like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have written it that way. That was obviously confusing for everybody. And so, you know, we should do it this way. Or if we hear from people, you know, in a situation like this, it's like, oh, that's a good idea. We could incorporate that, as long as, you know, the lawyers and everybody else lets us do it. So that's why we're asking you those questions, not for any specific one, but just in general, because we have this opportunity to speak with you today. So then once that FOA is drafted and approved and finally published, takes about 9 months, just like a baby maybe, the Office of Grants Management is also the one to publish it and manage the selection process. So that's not us. We get a list of people and they say, here's your grantees. And we say, okay, great. And then from there, we go forward and we work with the federal project officers in the regional office. And this is how it works at DOL. This is all different every place, right? But this is how it works, I guess I should say, at ETA. And then we work with you through the rest of the period of performance to try to help you be successful with that grant. So there you have it. That's the inside scoop. And we'll go to the next slide. So I mentioned that Congress has a lot to say in it. So I just wanted to mention a few things that I'm aware of that this is all public information. Otherwise, I couldn't tell you, but that's going on in Congress. So in the PY22 budget, which just happened a few months ago, they did appropriate a third round, and this is just related to community college training grants, right, or capacity building. So they did appropriate a third round of strengthening community colleges for $50 million this time. And there's a couple of pieces of legislation out there that may or may not ever pass, but if they did, and they may or may not include some community college things in them, the Competes Act and the reauthorization of WIOA. So as you can see there, what's going on with those. So we're just as curious as everybody else about how that will all happen. And next slide, please. So the Biden-Harris administration has stated their priorities as well. And some of their priorities include partnerships between community colleges and all these other organizations to identify in-demand skills. So they really want that. And on the next slide, we'll talk about quality jobs too. And they have a big emphasis on high demand, industry recognized credentials. So I don't think that any of that is really new, but some examples could be registered apprenticeship programs or pre-apprenticeships or youth apprenticeships, community college capacity building and training grants. They've been big advocates for that. And then sector-based training programs. Next slide, please. And yes, the slides will be available, or maybe they already even are. So 3 of those things that you like, these are the kinds of things that they would say, we want you to incorporate this into your funding opportunity announcement that you give back to us for us to approve. So quality jobs, and you can read more about what all this means, racial equity, and partnerships between employers and workers so that there's worker voice and things like that going on. So you'll see that in the various FOAs that come out from the Employment and Training Administration. So I'm going to turn it over now. I think we're just about back on time. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dawn for some ETA grant tips. And I didn't mention to you that Dawn has sat in your seat. She has been a grant writer. She's been a grant manager. She's worked at community colleges for about 20 years. So she knows what it's like. And she even worked at a rural community college, at least one, where she saw cows out her window. So I know that's not the only definition of rural. I know that. But anyway, Dawn, please take it away.
Maybe I should try to have people guess. It was cows and the water. So I looked out my office window and saw salt water and cows. So if you can guess what college I worked at, maybe some of you are here. So yes, about a year ago, I left the ranks of community college and joined Department of Labor. I'm very happy to be part of the Strengthening Community College Training Grants and the program office in general. So as you see from the slide, all grants that we will publish are on grants.gov. And I'm not sure if you all have set up your alerts. They're all ready and know all about that. Hopefully you already know about that. I lived very much in grants.gov when I was doing prospect research. So for looking for grants that would be applicable in my setting. If you don't, that's the primary action step of today. Please set up alerts on grants.gov and anything related to community colleges. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, there we go. Specific to the Employment and Training Administration, you'll find upcoming funding opportunities, tips, standard terms and conditions, and recruitment of grant applicant panelists at this website, which can all be useful. I want to specifically,
please,
oh, sorry, next slide. Yeah.
There we go.
I want to point out, at least from my experience, sitting as a panelist was invaluable in the process of submitting applications and knowing as much as I could about the back end of the process, as well as the applicant process. We also now publish upcoming grants. This is, we're doing this again. For a time we weren't doing it, but we are doing it again. So to give you a heads up so you can prepare and start planning specifically for funding opportunities. These are forecasts. They are also published. They're published on grants.gov, and they're also published on the Department of Labor's site. And you'll see that link on this slide. DO is also working toward allowing longer response times. I know when notices came out before, I felt like it was a sprint to the very end of that midnight hitting submit button or those types of really vigorous activity during grant season, but most grants have to be, though they'll vary by grant program. Most grants have to be awarded by a certain date or else the funding turns into a pumpkin and goes away, and a few have more flexibility. As you may already know, even when a forecast announcement and even if Department of Labor allows longer response times, it may be too late to start planning and after the funding opportunity announcement is made. So I encourage everyone to start now, and that means coming up with a system where you're looking for the grant opportunities, you become familiar with current and past Department of Labor competitive grant programs, and we'll be trying to help you out with that today. However, reading published project and national evaluations of programs can help you in that preparation as well, and plan for the grant cycle. Target specific programs to watch for and do preparation for. And when I say preparation, I want to specifically say that partner development. If you think about the priorities that were mentioned in a slide that Carol shared, partnership is up there. Partnership, partnership, partnership. And those don't happen overnight, as you well know, and that it's a very good idea to have prepared that and communicated your intent for looking for specific types of grants. Know your partners, build your partners, have a strategy or strategies for aligning partnerships to funding opportunities even before they come out, and a process for communicating and convening around announced opportunities. If you could go to the next slide. So more ETA grant tips can be found here at this link there, a whole toolkit worth for prospective applicants. So while you're waiting for proposals to be announced, these are really good materials to become familiar with. And here's another tip. FOAs can be really long. Read the whole thing. I cannot emphasize this enough, and pay very, very close attention to whatever section has scores. It's a grading rubric, like it for any course that you might teach at your college. And if what happens is that grading rubric gets passed on to the panelists who are ranking, and they use that rubric to score your application. So you might even want someone to read your draft proposal in light of the scoring rubric that is provided and let you know where you are not addressing what is mentioned. If you don't actually answer each and every question or address each and every score area, you'll miss out on points. And sometimes that's really significant. So being attentive to that. Another trick that I did often with funding announcements was to search for the words must, should, and those key terms. Sometimes that really helps as well to add more context to that rubric. And please note that scoring will vary by FOA. past success, maybe more points or fewer points. Points assigned also reflect leadership priorities or the priorities that we've shared earlier in this webinar. And now I'm going to turn it over to another colleague to provide some examples of current Department of Labor program grants that are of particular interest to community colleges. Zodi, you can take it away.
Thank you, Dawn. And I know it says Cheryl Martin on my little screen. My apologies. My name is Zodi Makondan, and I am part of the Division of Strategic Investments. So we're going to talk a little bit about our competitive grants and our grants for community colleges. Next slide, please. Thank you. Competitive grants of particular interest to community colleges include what's on the screen right now, and they include apprenticeship grants and contracts. We'll talk a little bit about strengthening community colleges. We'll talk a little bit about H-1B skills training grants, Youthbuild, Reentry projects, and the Job Corps demonstration projects. What we want to do is to give you a quick overview of each of those in the upcoming slides. We're going to be throwing a lot of information at you, but the slides do include links to everything that I'm going to be mentioning. Next slide, please. So the first grant I wanted to speak about is the apprenticeship grants and contracts. Registered apprenticeship is very high on the administration's priorities list for addressing the skills gap and providing American workers with another career pathway to a living sustainable wage. And we do not expect the funding to slow down in the foreseeable future. What you see on the slide, the apprenticeship.gov website, is the one-stop source for all things apprenticeships. I really do encourage you to look through the list of active grants and contracts because it gives you an idea of what activities are being funded. Next slide, please. One example of what you'll find in the apprenticeship.gov is the partner finder. This is a really handy tool which can connect you with the right tools to help you design, develop, or enhance your program. And you can search by a variety of things, including location, occupation, and industry. Next slide, please. There's also resources for community colleges on apprenticeships.gov, including case studies that showcase community college success stories. Those are very interesting to read, and I encourage you to take a look at those as well. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk a little bit about a new resource that was just put out recently, which are specifically for community colleges. And as you can see on the slide, Virtual Apprenticeship Network is its name. This is a toolkit which was developed by the American Association of Community Colleges and provides community college specific resources related to registered apprenticeship programs. That is something, as you can see, the link is on this slide, something for you to explore and take a look at. I'm now going to turn it over to Cheryl to talk about some of our grant programs. Cheryl?
Okay, it says I'm muted.
No, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I just realized I've been answering people to the panelists. So either Sean, I don't know if you can take those and send them to everybody, if that works. Somebody will take care of moving those. A different Cheryl Martin will do that. Okay. This is the oddest thing to have 3 Cheryl Martins up here with all of our different 4. Okay, anyway, strengthening community colleges. Round 1, you know about these, or you might know about this, you might have seen it before, and these are the ones that are already out there right now because they were awarded in 2021 at the beginning of that. When was that, right? Rather than the interesting thing about strengthening community college grants, these are a lot like TAACCCT grants or trade adjustment assistance, community college and career training grants that came out from like 2014 to 2018, $2 billion then, if you ever saw those. They're a lot like that in the sense that they focus on capacity building rather than like, okay, your grant is, I'm going to train 400 people in welding or something like that. And then you recruit the people and you train them and you get them jobs. With capacity building grants, it's a lot more complex, and you're building your ability to do a new, perhaps, or developing or adding on to a program of study, and doing various other things along the way that might help it be more effective for rural students, or for adult students, or for whatever, all students, whatever that is for you. So anyway, that's SCC, as we call it, SCC 1. On the next slide, you will see that there is, and this is currently on the street right now, so this is all what's in that FOA, and I can't really answer any questions about it when it's open. There's a person in the FOA that you can send questions to if you have questions about it. I hope that some of you are engaged in applications right now, but this one, interestingly, same legislation pretty much for SCC 1 and for SCC 2, but you will see a very different emphasis in this one. That came from the administration priorities of the administration that is in charge while this one is being written. And so this one is going to increase the capacity and responsiveness of community colleges to close equity gaps in addressing those skill development needs. So you take a program of study and you say, how are we going to address equity gaps within that program of study, and go forward with that. So this one, there's $45 million, and you see a theme there. The SEC 3 that Congress passed was $50 million. That'll be like next year. Anyway, about 40 million of the 45 million available will fund approximately 11 to 15 standard program grants. And then we may award up to 5 million out of the total amount for additional evaluation funding. And that all is explained in that funding opportunity announcement. But again, it's community colleges that have to be the lead, and they can be, they're a single institution or as part of a consortium. So this is something where if you, talk to others locally that are doing this, you might still be able to join and be part of a grant like that. There is some priority consideration given to lead applicants that are what are called qualified institutions, which might be an HBCU, although there aren't very many community colleges that are. It might be tribal, it might be another kind of minority serving institution, or a strengthening institution program. An SIP, and those are the Department of Ed, things, and that's all explained in the FOA there. So I'm going to turn it over to, in the interest of time, I'm going to turn it over to Erin to talk about our H-1B funded grants now.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And again, I wanted to share another source of competitive funding available here at the Department of Labor. They're what we call the H-1B skills training grants, which are funded by H-1B user fees. These are training grants designed to reduce the need for foreign workers in industries and occupations where H-1B visas are in high demand. These are jobs and occupations in information technology, advanced manufacturing, and healthcare. Community colleges have been recipients of many H-1B grants, especially when the eligible lead applicants for these programs are institutions of higher education. Additionally, community colleges are brought on as training providers, which are usually required partners of the grant applications. We do currently have 2 H-1B grant programs that would be of interest to this group. The first is the H-1B Rural Healthcare Grant Program, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide. And the next slide, the next grant program that we have, Zodi mentioned a little bit more, is the Scaling Apprenticeships through sector-based strategies, which required community colleges to be the lead grantee. As for future funding opportunities, the H-1B skills training grants are discretionary grant funds. There's no upcoming FOAs or funding opportunity announcements published in the next, we currently don't have anything out on the street, but please keep an eye out on grants.gov. Definitely, there's a hyperlink here, I believe, to the webpage. You can hear more or learn more about what the past grants have been doing to get you a sense of how you might be able to move forward. And so the next slide, we have the rural healthcare grant programs. In January of 2021, DOL awarded 40 million in H-1B funds for the rural healthcare grant program. And the purpose of this was to increase the number of individuals training in healthcare occupations that directly impact patient care and alleviate those healthcare workforce shortages by creating sustainable employment and training programs in healthcare occupations with a specific focus on behavioral and mental health. Again, the focus was to serve rural populations. And for this funding opportunity, we defined rural populations as those that met the criteria defined by the Health Resources and Services Administration, HRSA, at the Federal Office of Rural Health Policy. And then we also, rural populations are those, any federally recognized Indian tribes. I did want to share one of our current grantees is Coastal County's Workforce. They were awarded $2.5 million to support the state's Rural Healthcare Partnership Project to train rural workers for high-wage, high-skill career pathways in nursing and pharmacy. They have partnered with the Maine Community College system, and they are delivering training and education to provide at the certificate and associate levels for nurses, and using the following strategies: on-the-job training, apprenticeships, accelerated learning, online training, with the opportunity to earn stackable credentials and credits, fast track those credentials, and then subsidizing training and education, and provide support services where needed. I'll look for questions in the chat, please, and I'm happy to respond to them that way. But I'm happy to turn it back to Zodi.
Thank you, Erin. So you heard Erin mention the H-1B Scaling Apprenticeship through Sector-Based Strategies, affectionately known as SA to us. And this is a grant program that was awarded in 2019. And as Erin mentioned, the lead applicants were community colleges. And this grant is focused on developing and expanding apprenticeships. I do want to give one example of one of our grantees, and that's the West Virginia Council for Community and Technical College Education, which is based in Charleston, West Virginia, and is a consortium that includes a number of community colleges. The West Virginia Council for Community and Technical College Education was awarded the SA grant, and the grant's industry focus is IT, and its project, which is named Apprenticeships in Motion, or AIM, seeks to grow workforce to fill West Virginia's and the nation's information technology industry skills gap by replicating and nationally scaling the apprenticeship model in West Virginia. And it's using a learn and earn model. So that's just one example of a community college-led grant. Next slide, please. I want to very quickly just mention a couple of our other examples. These are not H-1B funded grants, but you would find interesting. There are links on the slides to get more information. So the first one I want to mention is the Youthbuild program. Youthbuild is a pre-apprenticeship model and is designed to offer the critical supportive services and secondary academic access and work-based learning opportunities for opportunity youth. Youthbuild participants are 16 to 24 years of age and a member of a low-income family in foster care or involved in the justice system. So the grant recipients for the Youthbuild program include educational institutions, including local school boards, public school districts, or community colleges and other organizations. Like I said, the link up on the slide will provide you with a little more information on the Youthbuild program. The next one that I want to talk about is DOL's Job Corps program. And this is the largest residential career training program and helps eligible people ages 16 through 24 complete their high school education and train them for meaningful careers and assist them with obtaining employment. Job Corps has agreements with community colleges or related institutions to teach career area courses or to have individual students take courses to gain college credit. These agreements are typically awarded via contract vehicles. You may be interested in finding information on whether there are centers near you for potential collaboration purposes and at the link shown on the screen. There is another program, the Job Corps Scholars Demonstration Program, which was launched in 2020, and is $25 million that went to 26 public colleges, including community colleges in many cases. It's a demonstration grant to try an alternative approach to the residential Job Corps, which I just talked about. And it offers similar services, including personal and counselor services, career technical training, wraparound supportive services included. This is just Job Corps without the residential aspect. DOL will be determining whether to continue this demonstration grant. The last program that I want to talk about is the Reentry program. DOL funds a number of grants to serve justice-involved young adults and adults who are currently or formerly incarcerated. And reentry grants often partner with community colleges. So this is another opportunity. One example geared towards working with community colleges has been the Young Adult Reentry Partnership, or YARP, as we call it. This has rounds 1 and 2. These grantees, through their sub-grantees, establish partnerships with local community colleges, juvenile justice systems, and employers, employer associations, or unions to provide structured programming for youth. A lot of information in a very short period of time, but as I mentioned, I think you'll find the links helpful that are on the slide. I'm going to now turn it over to Dawn to talk a little bit about learning from past grants. Dawn?
Great, thanks, Sodi. So if we could go to the next slide. Now, this program was mentioned before, and I'm hoping, given the number of community colleges that received funding through this program, you also might be familiar with it, TAACCCT. So across 4 rounds, about 2/3 or 66 to 70% of grantee colleges targeted rural areas. TAACCCT program was a $1.9 billion initiative with a total of 256 grants awarded between 2011 and 2018 to eligible institutions, mainly community colleges, to build their capacity to provide workforce education and training. And over the course of that program, there were department-led national evaluations of TAACCCT programs, which comprised implementation and outcome reports, synthesis reports, and topic briefs, adding to evidence on what works in workforce development and community college training. One such brief looked specifically at rural grantee colleges and how they differed from urban and suburban grantee colleges. So this slide represents much of the findings there, and I want to draw specific attention to the last section of the slide, where rural colleges were less likely than other colleges to do the following. And if you think back to the priorities that were shared around racial equity and a partnership, these are 2 areas I think that rural colleges might want to focus on. So targeting specific populations and targeted recruitment was done less likely, and partnerships, partnering with new organizations and enhance existing organizations, were things less likely to be done. And also, next slide. We selected 3 rural community college programs to sort of focus on, outcomes, addressing some of the areas of priority. And these are 3 snapshots of innovations by rural technical TAACCCT college grantees and/or by TAACCCT projects serving rural communities. So that's Missoula College with their Healthcare Montana project, which really looked at apprenticeship programs, and the AME Alliance by Central Lakes College in Minnesota, offering an example of working with employers to bring training to rural areas through technology, and the University of Alaska Southwest Fisheries Technology Project, which made remote learning as portable as possible for students and participants in their programs. And there are links on this slide that will take you to the reports that you can really drill into those results. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we think is a real area of benefit for rural community colleges, or could be, but of course it also brings its own challenges, is the funding opportunities that allow consortia. And so but what we are hoping are the benefits from this, and as some briefs from our TAACCCT programs have shown, that that consortia, or being a part of a consortia, can really build communities of learning and support within community colleges. It's also a way of leveraging resources and expertise across a group of colleges, and promotes collaboration and cooperation across distance along lines of common interest, and elevates the potential for broad systems integration and change. Providing the opportunity to engage a Department of Labor programs without carrying the full workload of managing the entire grant, and exposes less experienced institutions to models of grant management that are modeled across the consortium, and also developed as a consortia. And I know that when I was in the position of a rural community college looking at consortia, I often looked a lot at the challenges as well. So when thinking about going for a consortia, there's really a need to have the roles of consortium management and project management divided, especially at the lead institution, so that you know that your institution's project has attention, as well as the coordination of the consortium activities, and that can be a challenge. Communication, and with a consortium often, and what would be expected is increased complexity and perhaps a decreased implementation predictability. So those are things to consider when thinking about a consortia. But I'll go back to the benefits. I really think that when you haven't had a lot of experience with grants, particularly with Department of Labor grants, it is an excellent way to enter into Department of Labor grant funding by coming through a consortium. Next slide. And I'll hand it back over to Zodi.
Thank you, Dawn. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go through these the next few slides pretty quickly. What I wanted to talk about was the many other resources besides grants that could benefit you and your colleagues. And I'm hoping that you will be able to take a look at the slides and get the information that you need. So the first resource that I want to talk about is on Workforce GPS. You can register to receive updates about all our latest community college resources. On Workforce GPS, as you can see with the arrow, it's under communities. Make sure you select College Connections as one of your communities and get the updates that are on there frequently. Next slide, please. So for anything related to serving persons with disabilities, resources from our Office of Disability Employment Policy will be very helpful. Next slide, please. And they have a lot of technical assistance resources. I won't go through all of what's on this slide. We have provided the links to each of those resources. But ODEP, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, sponsors 5 policy development and technical assistance resource centers, and those are the ones that are on this slide. CAPE is the newest resource, and it's a state-focused COVID-19 response for youth with disabilities, and you can see the link, capeyouth.org. All the other ones, Employer Assistance and Resource Network on Disability Inclusion, or EARN, Job Accommodation Network, or JAN, a lot of acronyms: LEAD, Center and Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. PEAT are additional resources for hiring, supporting, and serving persons with disabilities. A lot of information from ODEP. Next slide, please. The other thing that is offered by the Center for Advancing Policy on Employment for Youth, CAPE Youth, which supports inclusive apprenticeships and community college pathways to careers for students with disabilities. Lessons from the Community College Demonstration Project are the focus of CAPE Youth blog mentioned earlier, and the youth site includes an evaluation and other information. So a lot of information on serving persons with disabilities that can be found from the links above. Next slide, please. Here's another resource, the Workforce Recruitment Program, which will be useful for graduates of your college who are interested in working for the federal government. Schools can register to participate in the program each spring from April to June at wrp.gov, and that link is also on this screen. Next slide, please. My apologies, I know we're throwing a lot of information at you, but so these are other tools and resources from DOL, from USDOL, and I will talk about them each briefly. As you can see, there are 5 of them on this screen. Next slide, please. My Next Move, which is at www.mynextmove.org, gives students 3 main ways to explore careers. 1, an online ONET interest assessment. The second one is an easy to read 1-page profile of each occupation, highlighting important knowledge, skills, abilities, technologies used. Provides simplified salary and outlook information. And the third, it provides links to find specific training and employment opportunities. There is also a Spanish language site called Mi Próximo Paso. Next slide, please. Career One Stop, which is at www.careeronestop.org. This includes tools to help job seekers with job search and training decisions, including how to investigate salary and benefit information, research education training opportunities, plan a job search and browse job sites, write and improve resumes and cover letters, and prepare for job interviews, and also search for jobs. A wealth of information can be found on Career One Stop. Next slide, please. This is the Competency Model Clearinghouse, and is also on careeronestop.org, and provides a common framework of skill sets and competencies essential to an industry. It's used to support curriculum evaluation and planning, help find and develop skilled workers, support worker recruitment, assessment and training, and identify area workforce gaps, skill gaps, and more. Great site for you to kind of dig into and explore. Next slide, please. So this is our CLEAR website. This is the Clearinghouse for Labor Evaluation and Research, in other words, CLEAR, and it seeks to make research on labor topics more accessible to practitioners, policymakers, researchers, and the public more broadly, so that it can inform their decisions about labor policies and programs. CLEAR identifies and summarizes many types of research, including descriptive, statistical studies and outcome analysis, implementation, and causal impact studies. There is a topic area just for community colleges that has reviewed more than 200 studies, many just recently. So if you're looking for evidence-based programs, CLEAR is a great place to start and explore. Next slide, please. If you don't know about skillscommons.org yet, please check it out. It's the world's largest collection of open educational resources for job-driven workforce development, and is very popular. It can also be a help when you get off to a much faster start with a new program or study, for example. So I would encourage you to take a look at that, the skillscommons.org. Next slide, please. Just a little more information on the skills commons. The resources are industry aligned, which as I mentioned on the previous slide, could be helpful in getting you off to a much faster start with a new program of study. A lot of great information on these sites. I'm now going to turn it over to Cheryl. Cheryl?
Hi. Sorry, I was trying to answer a question and I keep putting it just to the, there we go. All right. So thank you. Thank you very much, Sodi. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Aaron. And thank you to all of you who have stuck with us for this long. We still have these questions, you know, that, and you've put a lot of really helpful things in the chat, and I really appreciate that. And I didn't respond to every single one because sometimes it was just like, yeah, okay, I hear you. But it's so helpful to have you state it that way and for us to be able to say, these are the things that we're hearing. So if you have other thoughts that you would like us to hear, now is your chance, either through the poll or through the chat. We also, you know, if you have questions about anything that anybody said about any of these programs, aside from the open FOAs, I can't really say anything about much more about those, but if you have questions about the other kinds of programs or sort of general questions for Dawn, like tips or suggestions, we have just a few minutes left and we'd love to take advantage of the time to do that.
Cheryl, this is Steve. I just wanted to, I had been monitoring the chat. There are a couple of questions that some individuals I think would be, that were, that I had written down. So
Great.
One of them, and this was, and I can understand this challenge. So there was a question around if a grant includes hiring new employees, it's difficult to have time to hire the staff before the end of the grant period. So I think, and then also sustainability of that position. So is there any advice around that? Well, I'm going to let Dawn respond to that if she has thoughts. But one thing I would just say is that at least for the SCC and the H-1B grants, they are four-year grants. So, you know, I hope you can hire people in that first year. But, you know, yeah, yes, I hear you. Let me turn it over to Dawn.
I think that this is part of the like pre-preparation to some extent, and the structuring of how you approach grants at your institution. I have worked in a lot of different community colleges, and that structuring has happened very differently, from having a sort of pool of contractors that have worked on projects at the community college that then become a good pool of project managers that then transition into being a full-time employee at the college based on the grant funding available. I've been in that position. I've also been in a larger institution that had a pool of project managers and an extensive grants program where project managers worked on multiple grants at the same time and moved between funding and projects as funding became available or was awarded. You know, sustainability was always an issue of how to integrate maybe not the position, but the roles and responsibilities that were covered by the project manager, so that becomes, the grant doesn't become a sort of a boutique thing, but an integrated, institutionalized process. And so particularly with the Strengthening Community Colleges grants, you know, the 4-year frame really helps, and honestly, that rotation and expectation being made really clear around how, you know, when positions are dependent on grant funding and not, I think is really important for applicants to know and honor. So I always knew my position was based on grant funding, and in my particular case, I look forward to new projects coming along. So
I put a question in the chat about whether it has become any easier to hire for some positions. I mean, I know some positions you got to be there, you know, but maybe for, I don't know, some positions in the grant to hire remotely. And I also understand that if you're a rural community college, there's a whole pay issue, right? Like you're not going to hire somebody from New York City, whereas they're going to try to hire your person who likes living in a rural area, but then now is jumping to this higher paying job or something. Your system doesn't allow for full-time remote work. Yeah. So just curious about that. So did you have another question or other questions, Steve, from the chat?
Sure. One of the questions was revolved around data collection, and the one potential barrier to applying for grants, for DOL grants, seems to be much heavier lifts when it comes to data collection and reporting compared to others. And I have had the experience where the data points have changed mid-grant or been redefined. And so I think that adds another.
No, we've never done that.
So that has added a layer of complexity. So I can relate to that one personally.
Oh, data. We love our data and we go crazy with our data sometimes too. As far as the requirements on that, that's kind of like outside of our pay range, but still we can share that everything that's here we can share. And I know that there have been some efforts to start thinking about that whole data situation because of this. That might take a little while if we can get there. As far as it changing in the middle of things, that is really tough, and we really do try not to do that. And sometimes I guess there must be things beyond our control or something. But I'm aware that other agencies have different requirements for grants and they don't require as much tracking. We feel like, results really matter, and particularly employment results. And those are some of the hardest to track. Now, one of the things that we have just done in the last year is we finally got this MOU together with another federal agency, or this group of people, and not another federal agency, where for certain employment, and you will see this in the SEC2 FOA, that you have to report on like enrolled and completed. I'm hesitating here because I want to get this right, but that we will look to this thing called CRIS, C-R-I-S, which stands for something that's explained in there, to look for the employment rates, because it hooks into unemployment insurance systems across the United States. Because that was a really big issue we had with TAACCCT. Like, even if you got your UI data from your state, if you were in, Pennsylvania or something, and you got some kind of an agreement for that, which might have been like pulling teeth to get, what if that person got a job in New Jersey? Then, you didn't get to record them. And so that is one of the steps that we have been working on for a really, really long time. And so I hope it goes at least a little way to making it a little bit easier for tracking that part of it we can do for you.
I think the last question, because we're at time, but one of the challenges, and this was mentioned for rural specific to rural institutions, that their demographics tend to be less diverse, and so competing with urban institutions when diversity is a component of the application is a challenge. So is there any advice you have around that, or is there a way to sort of factor in a rural institution may not be as diverse?
Well, one of the things I would say is that there's a lot of different forms of diversity, right? So it might be that you, in a rural area, you look at males in jobs that are typically for females, or vice versa, females for jobs that, people might think about as male jobs historically. Also, if you want to perhaps, and this would really depend on the particular FOA, you would have to look at what it's asking you for there. But you know, it could be veterans. It could be like looking at the population of rural students who are successful in a certain career across the state. And you can say, we are looking to, you know, work on that gap or something like that. So there might be some creative ways that you can do that. It obviously all would have to be, and I'm not thinking about a particular FOA when I say that, I'm just thinking more broadly about the way I've heard this talked about. So that might be one way to look at it. And also what I've heard is that in rural areas, people tend to look at the whole, like say you cover, you know, your community college covers 15 counties in a rural area or something like that. There might be one county, and that if you break it down by county, because it's got whatever, a meat packing plant or something there, you know, that you've got, if you look at your numbers more disaggregated, you might see that there is actually more diversity there. This is something I've heard from somebody who did one of our webinars, that they looked at that and they realized that there was more of that going on than they realized, you know, if they disaggregated the data a little bit more. So,
all right, well, thank you very much for that. I'm going to turn it back over to Sean. I'm actually going to share the results of the poll. There's a few more questions I have, and what I'll do is I'll send those, Cheryl, to you, and then you know, we can sort of compile the answers and get them out to the group.
great, thank you.
Yeah, well, I want to say thank you again, Cheryl, Zodi, Dawn, and Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is wonderful, wonderful amount of resources and information for our rural community colleges. And I just want to say, as a reminder, we are going to be continuing this conversation on May 3rd. We're going to actually have a few leaders at a couple of 3 rural community colleges across the US to join us and share their experiences. So I'm putting up in the chat right now. Feel free to go through and register. We're also going to send a follow-up email, and all of these slides, along with this recording of this webinar, is going to be available on our site at ACCT. So we'll be following up and giving that information there.